Servant Girl Annihilator. History is haunted by killers who struck in the dark and then simply vanished, leaving no name and no face. One of the very first crept through the streets of a young American city. The year was 1884, and the city was Austin, Texas. It was a rough frontier town of wooden houses, dirt roads, and dim lamplight. It began with a young servant woman asleep in her bed at night. In the darkness, a silent intruder came for her. The method was terrifying. Victims were struck as they slept, then dragged outside into the yard, often attacked with an axe. Most of the victims were domestic servants, several of them black women whose names the city barely recorded. 2 white women were killed as well. Over about a year, 8 people were murdered, and several more were wounded. The whole city was gripped by panic. As night fell, doors were bolted and lamps left burning. Armed men patrolled the streets, terrified of who might be waiting in the shadows. Theories ran wild. Dozens of innocent men were suspected and accused, yet no evidence ever pointed to the real killer. A young writer living in Austin, later famous as O. Henry, gave the Phantom a darkly ironic name. He called him the Servant Girl Annihilator. This was 3 years before Jack the Ripper stalked London. Some call it the first documented serial killer case in America. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the killing simply stopped. The shadow that had terrorized Austin melted away into the night. He was never caught, never named. Some even wondered if he sailed across the ocean to become the Ripper, but no one ever knew. The Axeman of New Orleans. In New Orleans, a killer crept through the dark, and he never used a weapon of his own. He grabbed whatever axe he could find inside your house. It was 1918. The victims were almost always Italian-American grocers, asleep with their families in the rooms above their little corner shops. His method was always the same. He would chisel a panel clean out of the back door, then slip silently inside while the family slept. He found their axe in the yard or the shed, carried it to their bedside, and struck them as they slept. Then he simply left it behind. As the bodies were found, terror swept the city. People barricaded their doors, sat up all night with shotguns, and refused to sleep. Detectives could see the pattern, but not the man. More than 6 people were killed and many more left horribly wounded. Then in March of 1919, the newspaper printed a letter. It was signed by the Axeman himself. He wrote that he was not a man at all, but a demon, a fell spirit straight from the hottest hell. And he made a promise. On the night of March 19, he would spare every single home where a jazz band was playing. So the whole city played. Dance halls overflowed, and in houses on every street, families packed the rooms with music all night long. That night, the music never stopped, and neither did the dancing. And by morning, not a single soul had been harmed. In time, the attacks simply stopped. The Axeman was never caught, never named, and vanished into the New Orleans dark forever. Bible John. He was polite, well-dressed, and quoted scripture. And after a night of dancing, 3 young women left with him and were never seen alive again. Glasgow, Scotland, 1968. Every weekend, the Barrowland Ballroom filled with music, drink, and hopeful young couples looking for romance. There, a young woman met a charming, sandy-haired stranger in a smart suit. They danced close all night, and everyone noticed what a gentleman he was. When the ballroom closed, she left arm in arm with him into the rainy streets. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, she was found strangled near her home. The polite young man had simply vanished into the city. Then it happened again and again. 3 young women, all last seen leaving the Barrowland with the same well-mannered stranger, all strangled. But one victim's sister had shared a taxi with him that night. She survived, and she remembered his face and every unsettling word he said. In the taxi, he grew cold and preachy, quoting the Bible and speaking sternly of Moses and sin. The newspapers gave him a chilling name, Bible John. From her memory, police drew an artist's impression of his face. The sketch was printed everywhere, sparking one of Scotland's largest ever manhunts. Thousands of tips poured in, yet the polite, well-dressed man was never traced. It was as if he had never existed at all. Decades later, detectives turned to DNA. They chased new suspects and even exhumed a body from its grave, but none was ever confirmed as the killer. Bible John was never identified. Some now doubt one man killed all 3, leaving only a faceless shadow haunting the old Barrowland dance floor. The Cleveland Torso Murderer. In the darkest years of the Great Depression, something was hunting the forgotten poor of Cleveland. It struck in the shadows of the rail yards, and it was never caught. It was Cleveland, Ohio, in the 1930s. Down in a grim ravine called Kingsbury Run, desperate drifters and the homeless huddled in a sprawling shanty town beside the tracks. Then in 1935, the first grim discoveries appeared down by the railroad tracks. What was found there told police this was no ordinary killer. A dark pattern took shape. The victims were the people no one would miss. The drifters and the down and out plucked one by one from the shadows of the run. Because so many were nameless strangers, most of the victims could never even be identified. They died as ghosts, their names lost forever. As the count climbed toward at least 12 victims, terror gripped the entire city. The newspapers gave the unseen killer a chilling name, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. So the city called in a legend. Elliot Ness, the fearless lawman who had helped bring down Al Capone, was now Cleveland's public safety director. Ness threw everything he had at the case and led the manhunt himself. Detectives combed the rail yards and chased down every desperate lead. But the butcher was always one step ahead. He seemed to melt back into the darkness, taunting the greatest lawmen in America with each new victim. In 1938, a desperate Ness made a drastic move. He ordered police to raid the shanty town and burn it to the ground, trying to smoke out the killer. And then, as suddenly as they had begun, the murders simply stopped. No arrest, no confession, no final answer. The killing just ended. The Mad Butcher was never caught, and to this day no one knows his name. It remains one of the greatest failures of the man who took down Capone. The Zodiac? He killed at least 5 people, then wrote to the newspapers to brag about it. He signed his letters with a strange cross circle, and he was never caught. Northern California, the late 1960s. Young couples parked on quiet lovers' lanes under the stars, feeling perfectly safe in the dark. In 1968 and 69, he stalked those parked couples, opening fire on lovers' lanes at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. He always struck at night. At Lake Berryessa, he came for a picnicking couple wearing a black executioner's hood, marked with a white crossed circle. It was one of his few attacks in broad daylight. Then he moved into the city itself. In San Francisco, he shot a taxi driver at point-blank range and vanished into the night streets. Days later, letters began arriving at the Bay Area newspapers. The killer described his crimes in chilling detail and demanded that his words be printed on the front page. He gave himself a name. Every letter opened with the same 4 words, and each one was signed with a cross circle. This is the Zodiac speaking. He buried his secrets inside ciphers, whole walls of bizarre symbols mailed to the press. "Crack the code," he taunted, "and you will find my name." A schoolteacher and his wife cracked the first 408-symbol cipher at their kitchen table. But it held no name, only more menace, and his other codes defied everyone. His threats grew even darker. He warned that he would target a school bus full of children, a threat that terrified the entire Bay Area. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the letters simply stopped. The killings ended, no arrest was ever made, and the trail went stone cold. In 2021, amateur codebreakers finally cracked his unsolved cipher, but it still hid no name, and to this day, the Zodiac has never been identified. Jack the Ripper. In the autumn of 1888, a killer stalked the fog-choked streets of London. He murdered without warning, vanished without a trace, and was never caught. His hunting ground was Whitechapel, a desperate, overcrowded slum in the East End of London. Its dark alleys and gaslit courtyards were the perfect place to disappear. The first canonical victim was Marianne Nichols. On the 31st of August, she was found in the street with her throat cut deep and twice. The killings did not stop. Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, then Mary Jane Kelly. At least 5 women, the so-called canonical 5. This was no ordinary murderer. He mutilated the bodies and cut out organs with a terrible precision, leading many to believe he had real anatomical knowledge. Terror gripped Whitechapel. After dark, the streets fell silent and empty, as frightened residents formed vigilance committees to patrol the shadows themselves. Then a letter arrived, mocking the police and promising more death. It was signed with a name that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. One chilling letter, signed from hell, arrived with a small box. Inside was half of a human kidney claimed to be taken from one of his victims. The police launched a massive manhunt, questioning thousands. But with no fingerprinting and no forensic science of the age, the killer slipped through their fingers. Over the next century, hundreds of suspects were named: doctors, barbers, butchers, even members of the royal family. Not one was ever proven. And then, as suddenly as they had begun, the murders simply stopped. The killer melted back into the fog and was never heard from again. More than 130 years later, he has never been identified. Jack the Ripper remains the most famous unsolved murders in history. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more stories like this one.